Hey everyone, welcome to the Anexinet, the official podcast for Anexinet. This is episode 38, recorded September 27th, 2018. I'm your host, Ned Bellavance, Director of Cloud Solutions at Anexinet. Here on the Anexinet, we talk technology for the enterprise, covering infrastructure, app dev, analytics, and anything else that is shiny. On this episode, we'll be talking about a topic near and dear to my heart, Azure Stack. The product is now a year into general availability, and I've got two program managers from the Azure Stack team, David Armour and Bradley Bartz, here on the show to talk about the state of the union when it comes to Azure Stack, past, present, and future. Welcome to the show, David and Bradley.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Before we dive into the world of Azure Stack, why don't you first tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and what you do on the Azure Stack team. David, if you want to go first.
Yeah, so my name's Dave, and I work on Azure Stack. I've been on it since the very beginning. Currently, I watch over infrastructure as a service on Azure Stack, so that's your compute, network, storage, as well as onboarding of Azure services when they come into Azure Stack. And currently, we're working on bringing in Event Hubs, and IoT Hub.
Gotta get that naming right.
Yeah,
otherwise
one's
marketing.
a hubs and one's a hub.
That's not confusing.
Yeah.
And Bradley, what about you?
Yeah, so I work with David on Azure Stack, and I focus really on the set of Azure services, the DevOps tooling, the hybrid application patterns. Think of it like, what do you do with Azure Stack when you get one? As opposed to, the operating kind of IT focus. Mm-hmm. Others on the team focus on that, but then our teams focus on those scenarios and use cases that you hear about for the why would I want an Azure Stack and what's it going to do for me? Those scenarios.
Right. So, David, you're more on the side of how do I operate the thing once I have it to a certain degree, and then you're more on the side of now what? I've got this thing. I've got an operator who set it up for me, and now I'm like the tenant.
Yes, exactly.
And what am I going to be deploying this crazy thing
That's
that
right.
I've got? Okay. So I know the pitch and the use cases for Azure Stack have evolved since the product went GA. And last year I started hearing a very consistent message, which is Azure Stack is an extension of Azure. Is that still the consistent message, or has that evolved a little bit more?
No, it really is. That, those positionings of major use cases have really resonated, and we've got reinforcement from customers deploying that those are the use cases that they're actually deploying for. Azure Stack is really not positioned as an alternative or a different destination than Azure. It is really designed to complement your Azure strategy and designed to basically complement your portfolio when you have assets or scenarios which do not fit in Azure alone. And that's where Azure Stack fits in to complement your Azure offering. And that's what we see playing out in the real world.
Okay. And I know there were a number of, basically three primary use cases that were kind of trotted out at the beginning. Are those still the primary use cases that you're seeing in the field now that, customer adoption has been ramping up?
They are. And those use cases, we're talking about them vaguely, but they really are about the edge and disconnected. And these are really about those scenarios that are on the oil rigs or the factory floor. They're kind of the IoT-focused scenarios. The next category was about the regulated industries, the governance, where you have basically policy constraints that are preventing you from going into the public cloud. We still see that. And the last category is really about modernizing a legacy or your heritage portfolio. How do you modernize that and get it cloud ready? And those still resonate. I would say one of the things that surprised us a little bit that we've learned about as customers have been, adapting it and starting that transition is this evolution of what I'll refer to as more of a vertical appliance, a single-use Azure Stack. And so we're starting to see this happen now in the marketplace where we have larger ISVs that are building solutions for specific industries, whether it be oil and gas, whether it be manufacturing, where the solution is actually hosted on an Azure Stack, but it is used for that purpose and deployed in the environment that it's intended to go in, as opposed to a general purpose cloud for doing all things. It really is kind of a vertical appliance. And we do see an uptake in those kind of use cases.
Interesting. And then in that case, their end users are going to it as the destination. So for their end users, it looks like a SaaS that they have locally.
That's right. So it's like a local SaaS.
Ooh, that's kind of a weird way to think about it,
It
right?
is.
Yeah, local SaaS. It's interesting. So I guess one of the use cases that you mentioned, oil and gas, they're probably the ones that are really kind of doing that thing. If you need that compute on the oil rig, and maybe it's an offshore oil rig, how do I get that compute local and have that vertical solution, but still develop it in the cloud?
Absolutely. So that's clearly a case. We see that in the natural resources, whether it be oil and gas, even mining. We see it in the mining and remote destinations.
Electricity.
We also see it in the, believe it or not, in manufacturing. There are many manufacturers have lots of factory floors and plants.
Sure.
And sometimes they have locations where connectivity is challenging.
Right.
It may not be reliable all the time. And they want to make sure that factory floor does not slow down in the event of a network outage. So they want to have that reliable production regardless of network connectivity. So we see Stack fitting into those scenarios as well.
Right. I was just talking to someone in the steel manufacturing industry, and he has a plant that's in Wisconsin, and their internet connectivity goes down probably about once a month for a couple hours. And so they can't put their critical systems up in the cloud because that hour of disconnected events a month is going to cost them millions of dollars. So they have to keep the workload local.
Yep.
And I did talk to them a little bit about Azure Stack. Right now they're running everything on an AS400. And I was like, wow, okay, well, if it works, it works, right? But
yeah, exactly. But those are the scenarios we see. The other exciting news really has been about the clarification of our edge portfolio.
Okay.
So oftentimes we talk about just Stack, and when we talk about these IoT scenarios, even the oil rigs, the manufacturing and mining, or in these scenarios, what we're seeing now is there's a whole set of solutions from Microsoft that can work together in different combinations. And this is one of the things we rolled out at Ignite this year, was presenting that portfolio, whether you're talking about Sphere on the device for secure devices, up through a gateway device with IoT Edge, and then the DataBox family, where the DataBox family comes in where you need lightweight compute and storage that maybe is tiered to Azure, and then a new technology or new product they just announced at Ignite is DataBox Edge. DataBox Edge is pretty exciting for a lot of these scenarios where you need a low-cost gateway device that has both compute and storage for doing some of the data processing, doing the running machine models, for doing image recognition, doing anomaly detection, doing those kind of things. And those DataBox edges will connect directly to an IoT hub running in Azure, or if you want to be able to manage your devices and aggregate all of that data for a set of applications that are going to run, for example, in an environment where connectivity is at a premium or not reliable, drop an Azure Stack in as an alternative to Azure to provide that reliability regardless of internet connectivity.
And in that case, you'd run IoT Hub
on Azure Stack. Yeah, so basically clarifying how the edge portfolio all fits together for a comprehensive solution for either an always connected, an occasionally connected, or a fully disconnected environment is the big news that we've been sending at Ignite this year.
I mean, the fully disconnected environment is what resonates with me, with that sort of like, I need an edge device, so I've got DataBox Edge, and then that needs to aggregate into something that is not going to be connected to the internet, so I've got Azure Stack, but I can still do my development of new models and applications in Azure proper, and then push those models down to Azure Stack in some way.
You got it.
That's why we focus on consistency between Azure and Azure Stack, so that our developers can make that investment in their code and have it work both places.
And that message and solution has not only really resonated, it's actually developed as a result of feedback from customers who are implementing these solutions.
Sure, yeah. I mean, that's kind of customers are going to drive the product now that it's GA. And you're kind of seeing what the use cases are and how people are actually adopting it. I'm curious, do you know roughly how many multi-node Azure Stack stamps are out there in the world today?
More than we expected. How about that?
I mean, that's good, yeah.
So we have a robust pipeline. Things are going out. We don't usually, we don't ever share numbers. But let's say it's exceeded our expectations, and we're working hard to keep up with the demand.
Well, that's great. I mean, I will say that reports coming from a lot of analysts have been very rosy for Azure Stack. Others have been a little on the more skeptical side. Can you tell me, what are some of the challenges to Azure Stack adoption that you've seen out there, and how are you addressing those challenges?
Some of the challenges come from misperception about what Stack is for.
Sure.
There are some, we've had some situations where prospective customers are looking at Stack as, oh, that's all things Azure. I'm going to get everything in Azure and I'm going to be able to host it myself, and it's going to be a cheaper way to do Azure than going to Azure Public.
Right.
And that turns out not to be true. So anybody that's hearing that is not a use case for Azure Stack.
You can run all of Azure on your 4 nodes.
There's just plain physics
That'd be
here.
amazing, right?
You know, one, they're not going to fit.
Right.
Even when we have a larger catalog of Azure services, getting all the services on a single Azure Stack or a 4 node simply won't be possible.
Right.
So it really is about fine-tuning the messaging and helping clear up those misperceptions about what Stack is for. And Stack really provides that general Azure compute platform that is compatible with Azure. It's providing that fabric and then targeting specific workloads, specific verticals to help enable those, like we're doing with IoT.
Right.
So,
yeah, I know a lot of the services that exist on Azure are built off of other services that exist in Azure. So one of the challenges of bringing services to Azure Stack is any service needs to have the underlying supporting services there as well.
Exactly. Just imagine, if you were just to willy-nilly start picking services out of Azure, you might have a nice catalog, but then it might not work well together to implement any given solution.
Right.
And so the way we're prioritizing and driving what additional capabilities we light up in Azure Stack is really based on those end-to-end solutions. What's the vertical? What's the use case that we need to enable on Stack? And that's why the thrust right now is all around IoT, and that's why you're seeing IoT Edge, you're seeing the Event Hubs, IoT Hub, all coming together as the basically the industry and the solution that we're completing the set of services that are required to enable those scenarios.
Right.
Right, and I know some of the services in Azure are still using the old ASM model, and so those services are even trickier to move down to Stack, because Stack is ARM only. It doesn't have any idea about ASM.
Many of the services are in themselves moving forward to an ARM-based model,
right.
going to the new compute model. And so as they do that, Stack now becomes an interesting target for them to go after.
Sure.
And again, but that's really based on what does the customer need to accomplish? So it really is a customer demand-driven priority.
Okay. So services today, I know we've got App Service that's on there. You've got the MySQL and the Microsoft SQL resource providers. IoT Hub and Event Hub are on their way.
On their way.
Mm-hmm. What other big roadmap features are coming soon or in development?
Those are the big ones. I would add to that list, though. We just announced and made available our Kubernetes clustering on Azure Stack. It's in public preview, so if anybody with an Azure Stack or an ASDK, they can go into the marketplace feed and they'll see the Kubernetes on Azure Stack available, so you can hydrate and make that available in your marketplace for creating Kubernetes clusters. And the same with Service Fabric. Think of these as the underpinnings for other Azure services. They actually will use Service Fabric clusters or Kubernetes clusters as the basis of delivering that service. And so these underpinnings now are starting to light up. And a new service that is now available. If you're an Azure Stack customer, you've got it, which is Azure Monitor. It's in the product, so that's a new one that is also available. And I don't want to omit the big one that just came out is Managed Disks. Managed Disk.
Yes, I saw that was in 1808, and I was like,
exactly. That's actually a big deliverable, and that just landed. And that's, just from a mindset perspective, the other thing to think about with Azure Stack is it's not a product that is a fire and forget for Microsoft where we update it, once a year, once every other year. This thing is a living service.
Yeah.
So it's being updated monthly. And
I was going to say, I know that when things initially came out that the cadence was to only stay a certain number of revs behind on the API for all the various services within Azure, and also constantly provide updates on a monthly cycle. So has the team been able to keep up with that pace of acceleration and delivery?
Well, actually, last month we just pushed forward the compute version to 2017. We moved the network one forward and the storage. All of them are now the October 2017 release of Azure.
Oh, wow, okay. And I think the way that you control the APIs that are being used in your templates is, or at least in PowerShell, is using API profiles, correct?
That's right.
Well, API profiles will scope you to the set of versions that exist both in Azure and in Azure Stack.
Okay.
And those profiles will be updated as the versions are updated in Azure Stack. And so what David's referring to is that the version of our compute, our networking, and storages were just refreshed in Azure Stack to bring us forward to the 2017 version of those interfaces in Azure. And this is the other thing to bear in mind. Azure Stack is actually multi-version aware. So even though we bump versions ahead, like we talked to the 2017 version, you can still use the prior versions of those interfaces. And that is true in Azure as well. So even though Azure may be on the latest version, the previous version and the version before that are still usable, and you can still use the old version tags even in Azure Public or in Azure Stack. So Stack supports multiple versions concurrently in every update.
But the idea of the profiles is you don't have to take.
You don't have to worry about it.
You don't have to keep track of all of that, right?
You use profiles when you have a workload that you want to easily move from Azure to Azure Stack and vice versa. That gives you the safe versions that exist in both environments.
Right, so if you use the hybrid profile, you know that all the APIs being used under the covers are going to be compatible with both deployments.
Right. Even though they might be, the versions for the individual things might be different numbers, you don't have to keep track of all of that.
And there's a lot of different APIs.
Yes.
So trying to keep track of all the various versions and making sure you're writing or typing out the number correctly, because I fat finger everything.
One might be like September 2017, the other one is October, because they go at different rates in Azure themselves.
Okay. And so, the current version, is it 1808 or is 1809 out?
1808, I believe, is the current version right now.
By the way, for your listeners, they should know 18 is the year.
Right.
And 08 is, or the following numbers are the month.
Right.
That's just an indicator. It isn't always true. Sometimes the day we built it was in 1 month and the day we released it is in the next month. So it's kind of gives you a general idea.
Yeah, and I think that numbering is becoming much more common, since that's sort of what the Windows Server Cadence has been using for its semi-annual channel. And a lot of Linux distributions kind of adhere to that numbering system.
Yeah, and that numbering system really applies to the update for Azure Stack, and it's the fabric and the admin and the portal experience that we're delivering. So 1808, that does not necessarily translate directly to the API versions. Right. The API versions then are following the Azure API versions, such as the 2017 October version. So, but in 1808, the versions for the Azure services updated as well to the Azure versions.
So going back to the tremendous growth you've been seeing with Azure Stack, a lot of things have to continue to scale to accommodate that growth. So I assume that your team has been growing. Maybe?
Absolutely, absolutely. You bet. Especially in our devs, the folks that actually get the work and building the product. We are growing rapidly.
And then the partner ecosystem seems to be growing as well to meet that demand.
Indeed.
So
it's amazing.
I know that out of the gate it was Dell EMC, HP, and Lenovo. I think were the first three, and then Cisco after that. How many OEM partners are there now for Azure Stack?
Well, we added Wortman,
Huawei.
Okay. So that means you can deploy in China?
Yeah.
We can indeed.
We can.
We got some stamps in China?
And it isn't just the OEM partners that are growing. Our software partners that offer solutions in our marketplace or even outside of our marketplace to do things like DR or backup. It's amazing how many we
have a growing ISV ecosystem. We publish the list of ISV solutions in our marketplace feed, and we just did a blog post this week that highlighted some of our ISV solutions.
Okay. Yeah, I got to say, to me, one of the most compelling things about Azure Stack is the marketplace syndication. I think that was announced last year at Ignite.
Right.
And I was like, ooh, that's the killer app. That's the killer feature. The fact that I don't have to manually deploy these items on Azure Stack, I just click a button and I now have whatever that ISV solution is, whatever that networking solution is. So I've seen the growth. I know Bitnami's got I don't even know how many listings in the marketplace.
They're here at the event.
Very popular item.
Yeah, absolutely. But then you said you guys can publish things through that marketplace as well, like the Kubernetes service.
And the Windows Server images, the
configuration and update management from Azure. We just published that VM extension, so you can actually patch and manage your virtual machines running in Azure Stack from the service in Azure.
Oh, that's interesting to dig into. So the configuration manager, if I remember correctly, you set up configurations in Azure for how you want the VM to be laid out and the update policies and all that.
So your missing patches will show up in your Azure portal from your Azure Stack VMs, and you can schedule when you want those patches to be applied, just like you do any other virtual machine in Azure.
For the enterprise audience, just think how powerful that is. That means that as part of your deployments on Azure Stack, you can be deploying consistently the VMs that you're deploying in Stack and in Azure with a single dashboard for managing your policy and your updates across the Azure environments, whether it be in public cloud, whether it be in your enterprise.
So it's not just about deploying, it's after you deploy, you can manage them.
That's right, exactly.
Yes. Okay. The other thing that needs to scale is the solution itself, right? I know that it was originally 12 node. I think 16 node is announced.
In the works?
In the works. I think it's up to the OEMs at this point, right?
Yeah, the big thing that was also the ability to add node. So we added the ability, when you have a 4 node, to incrementally grow your Azure Stack. So our investments really are in two flavors. One of which is to grow vertically, and then over time we'll add the ability to grow horizontally. But right now we're growing vertically, and that's what we've announced.
So you're staying within the same scale unit,
that's
just adding additional nodes.
Yeah.
And then, so I guess the big plan after that is to have multiple scale units. Is that that's on the roadmap for next year?
Right. It is definitely in the backlog and the roadmap, and it's an area of investment.
Okay.
And the other thing is that the OEMs are making bigger what each node is. So they're cramming more in there, more cores, more memory, more storage.
There's
amazing.
a vendor out on the show floor right now that has a 1 petabyte in 1U server. They're using that the new Intel Ruler SSD form factor. And so I think it can hold like 32 rulers in 1U of space.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously that's not part of the Azure Stack solution yet, because each node would cost you about $900,000. But when you think about like that level of capacity and then all the compute you can dump in there as well, it's pretty amazing what you could put in a single scale unit.
It is
exactly.
Very cool. What about Ultra SSDs? Are those coming to Azure Stack?
Well, that was just announced here at the show from Azure. So, I mean, that will be on our roadmap to bring it into Azure Stack.
Someday.
Figure out how we do that.
Yeah, I guess that's really very hardware dependent, right? Because you need like an NVMe attached storage and all that good stuff. What about at the higher level, the management endpoint for an Azure Stack? I guess once you get beyond a single scale unit, you have multiple scale units. Are those going to make up a region that has a regional endpoint? What's sort of the thought behind how that's going to function?
It's basically just adding more capacity to the region that you have.
Okay.
So it's just expanding the capacity of your scale unit. It now looks like it's a bigger scale unit.
Gotcha.
So from the end user, it's not going to look any different. It'll still be the same region they're deploying to. It just got bigger.
Okay. What about like a multi-region portal? Is that something that's under consideration?
We're still talking to customers with multi-region requirements to understand the use case, the scenarios.
Sure.
What are they really trying to do with multi-region deployments?
Regions or availability zones?
There's a lot of issues that come into play. And what we find that customers are really doing in many cases is actually just deploying multiple Azure Stacks. And this is one of the other things that surprised us, is that customers are buying not just one Azure Stack, but several.
Okay.
And they're deploying those into different geographies, sometimes even within the same company in the same area. They're deploying multiple stacks. And so in many cases, when they say multi-region, it's really just talking about having stack in different locations. And then the question comes up, there's, some customers are asking, well, how do I manage my solutions when I have multiple of them out there?
As a fleet of Azure Stacks.
As a fleet of Azure Stacks, right. So those kind of questions come up. So we're listening to those as well. So right now, we're really focusing on getting those deep insights by what do customers mean by multi-region? What's the problem they're trying to solve? And then tackling that.
Yeah, I would imagine in that particular case, it's managing the permissions, the Active Directory authentication, and then also being able to patch in a way that's rapid and
that's what
unified.
We're hearing. Yes.
Okay. Very interesting. Okay. One thing that you guys showed during one of the demos was Azure Stack Ruggedized. So what's that all about?
That's pretty cool. So what we're seeing from many of our customers is the need to have a forward deployed Azure Stack for disaster recovery scenarios, or where you're going in, imagine a hurricane comes through. A lot of the existing infrastructure is down. Mm-hmm. You want to be able to have an Azure Stack that you can easily lift and move. Talk about lift and shift, right? It's a lift and shift from continental U.S. to an island, right? So it's a lift and shift to the cloud. And so we see those scenarios coming up, and that's where our partners are coming up with innovative solutions to help enable these kind of deployments, where you can have an easy easily packaged Azure Stack that can be put in the back of an SUV and delivered, or put on a ship and delivered into an environment where you have these ruggedized, durable cloud boxes that can be dropped in and provide functionality on site.
Yeah, it looked like a Pelican case, basically, if people are familiar with that. And it had 2 U's, I guess 2 U's or 4 U's in it. And I think it was 2 cases would make up a 4-node deployment. And that's pretty wild.
It's pretty cool.
To think, you could have that just shipped out to wherever you needed the compute power. And I mean, one of the other selling points for me about Azure Stack is the fact that you don't have to build it all yourself. It's already configured. It already kind of runs out of the box. Yes, there's some homework that the deployment team would need to do, but it's a managed solution.
Yeah, and I think that's a very key point to call up. Not only is it just a pre-built, ready-to-go cloud, but the fact that it's been designed with security intrinsically. It's built into it, where it really is this sealed environment. It provides a great way to build and deploy these clouds, but the infrastructure and the back end is sealed, secure by design, to make it easy to deploy to these environments. You don't have to worry about, did the technician configure it right? Did I have a new vulnerability in the system? Did they run that? So that's been predetermined, prepackaged. You can have that security with confidence.
Yes. In fact, there are no administrators of Azure Stack. You're only an operator. No one has administrative rights into the system.
Right.
So,
and speaking of security, I know that Azure Stack is certified to work with the Azure GovCloud, correct?
It is indeed.
That's right.
Does that mean it also has FedRAMP and a couple other of the security certifications around that?
That's right. We just got assessment for FedRAMP High. We announced that here at the conference this week.
FedRAMP High.
Yes.
So I assume that is a higher level of security.
And again, that's an assessment. Okay. Part of a certification involves people and processes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so when somebody gets an Azure Stack, they're going to be providing the people and the processes. So what we've done is we've done the technology part of it. We've had assessed, and it has passed the FedRAMP High requirements for that. But when someone implements an Azure Stack, they're going to have to add on the people and the processes for that.
Right. Has there been a lot of interest from the government sector in Azure Stack as a solution? I imagine there would be.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What about some of the other sovereign clouds that Azure has, like Azure Germany or Azure China?
We're customer driven, and we do support Azure China.
Okay.
So you can now deploy in China and hook up to Azure China.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So that's already available, and you can do that. And so as demand comes in, we'll provide capabilities to the sovereign clouds.
Gotcha. Okay. Very cool.
And by the way, what this means is you get that Sovereign Clouds marketplace for syndication.
That's right.
You use their Azure Active Directory, not the central Azure Directory.
Okay,
so it allows you to basically incorporate your Azure Stack with that instance of Azure.
Are the majority of Azure Stack using Azure Active Directory as their authentication source, or how many are using ADFS instead?
It really depends, the breakdown. For disconnected, you have to go with the ADFS option for disconnected. So it really is gated on the scenario. Am I going to be a disconnected deployment or not? Do I need to have that resiliency to network connectivity? In that case, they're predominantly ADFS deployments.
Right.
Even in scenarios where you have connectivity, most of those will go with AAD.
Okay.
Yeah. What we found is disconnecting is kind of a gray thing. People have different ideas of what disconnected means, right? Some of them are like completely disconnected, no network connectivity, whereas others, they just have very strict rules about what can connect and what can't connect.
Okay.
And so it's kind of a slider bar on the whole connectivity thing that we learned.
Absolutely right.
And I imagine others, it's really more of a situation where they can't get connectivity, or at least reliable connectivity a lot of the time. So you kind of got to pick which one.
I think that's
makes
one
sense.
of the things that's attractive about Azure Stack is that it does support these variety of options that customers have. So it's not a one-size-fits-all in that regard. It really can be tailored to your use case.
Okay. Now, for people who want to get their hands on Azure Stack and start learning about it, I know there's the Azure Stack Development Kit, but that has some beefy hardware requirements. If you're someone who just tinkers around, you might not have a server sitting in your basement that's got 16 cores and 128 gig of RAM. So is there anything that you guys are working on to make that experience simpler for people who just want to get a taste for Azure Stack?
Well, one of the things that I would recommend, we do now have an Azure Stack operator certification program where you can go through and get trained and certified for Azure Stack. And one of the things you can do to get ready for that certification, we actually have basically a set of training and materials online that'll get you started with that, but as part of that, you get a lab that you can go ahead and run where it'll actually spin up an Azure Stack for you.
Oh, really? Okay.
Right? And then you can work with that Azure Stack. And this is free, so you don't even have to go buy the hardware. Now, it's a limited time, but if you just want to kick the tires, see what's going on, go through some materials, and then play with an Azure Stack, you can do that. So I'm going to give you an URL right now. So it's aka.ms.
Okay.
Azure Stack, one word, and then MOOC.
MOOC.
Yeah. aka.ms, Azure Stack, MOOC. And if you hit that, you can actually sign up for a set of operator training prereqs. It's not the certification program. It's an introduction to operators. But as part of that, you'll get access to a lab that will give you access to an Azure Stack.
So is that Azure Stack, I'm assuming it's an
OneNode.
ASDK.
It's the ASDK.
OneNode.
It gives you access to a OneNode.
Okay. Still, that's if you're trying to get that level of experience.
And you don't have a beefy server sitting in your basement, there's a way to get started. And at least,
sadly, I don't.
Yeah.
That's really cool. What about making it available on public Azure, at least the experience? I think I'd heard something about being able to run something against a resource group that would make it appear like it was Azure Stack.
Okay, there's a couple of things here. It is possible through API profiles and policy on your subscription and your to basically kind of, if you will, put guardrails on your Azure environment so that you're scoped down to the set of services or API versions that are available in Azure. So kind of from a developer perspective, kind of looks like an Azure Stack, but that doesn't give you an operator experience.
Right, that's a tenant
That's
experience.
more of a tenant experience.
By the way, you can find that by doing a search on Azure Stack tools. You'll find that available there.
Yeah.
Okay.
As far as deploying the OneNode in Azure, that's not really a scenario we can support today.
Right.
Although Ned's an expert on doing
there are
that.
some people that have dabbled in that space.
A little bit, yeah.
A little bit.
But if you're just trying to try it out and don't want to spin up something complex on Azure or purchase that hardware, that lab thing is absolutely fantastic.
That's where I would steer people to.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. You mentioned the certification a little bit. So there's an Azure Stack operator certification.
There is.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Is that the only certification for Azure Stack
today?
It
is. Because really the rest of the experiences in Azure are Azure experiences.
Right.
So Azure certification.
So your Azure certification, it does cover Azure Stack. But the operator's experience is unique to Azure Stack.
Right.
And so that's the certification there for operators that we have. And if you actually search for Azure Stack certification, you'll find the links that'll get you to the certification program. But it is active, up and running, and you can actually get that certification today.
Okay, great. That's all the questions I have on my list. Is there anything else that you want to talk about or topics you'd like to bring up about Azure Stack? I know it's a pretty broad topic.
I'm just amazed at the creativity that our customers, our developer community, and our ISV ecosystem have around Azure, around Azure Stack, and hybrid in nature, and thinking through the set of edge scenarios that are there. So one, I encourage you to go out there and learn more about Azure Stack if you don't already. If you've got an Azure Stack there, be the innovator in your company. Do that, become that thought leader, that evangelist of what the potential is to kind of go beyond what is possible today and start looking for the direction of where you can go. And think about how you can take advantage of not only having this Azure footprint in your environment, in your data center, but how you can leverage Azure as well as part of that, whether you're creating hybrid applications that automatically scale, whether you're doing machine model learning in the public cloud and bringing that down into Azure Stack to do your scoring and operation, and get to know what the edge portfolio. Become that evangelist, that enthusiast that understands the possibilities to help inform the decision makers in your organization.
Great. That was awesome. We should write that down somewhere.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything to add to that.
Well, the last question I have, and I know I've asked you this before, so this will just be for Bradley. What is your favorite 80s movie?
Oh, my. The first thing that, I don't even know if it's my favorite, it's just the first thing that popped in my mind was Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
It's not a bad choice.
Not a bad choice at all.
All right, great. And that was our show with David and Bradley. Thanks to the marketing team for helping me pull this together. Thanks to Anexinet for helping produce this podcast. If you're looking for a company to help you with your digital transformation, then I would recommend reaching out to Anexinet, see how they can help. If you've enjoyed this episode of Anexapod, why not leave a nice review on iTunes? If you're looking for more content, you can check out our sister podcast, Buffer Overflow. On the show, I am joined weekly by my co-host Chris Hayner to discuss what is new and interesting in the IT news sphere. You can find out more about me and what I'm up to on Twitter at Ned1313 or on my website, nedinthecloud.com. Thanks for tuning in, and remember, IT moves pretty fast. If you don't stop to look around once in a while, you could miss it.